It's 1994. The sign by Ace of Base is top of the charts. NASA loses contact with the Magellan spacecraft as the probe descends into the thick atmosphere of Venus. And something the US Vice-President Al Gore labeled the information superhighway is beginning to gain mainstream attention. It's called the Internet, and it promises to usher in a new era of connectivity for the whole world. One person who heeds the call of Al Gore's vision is Marc Andreessen, who along with a few friends found one of the first web browsers called Netscape. The internet up until that point mainly consisted of a series of links that led to text-based, harsh on the eyes websites. Netscape changed all of that. They created a software that made navigating the internet so much easier. It was a massive hit. By 1996, Netscape boasted 36 million users and was one of the most valuable tech companies on the stock market. During this period, Microsoft was the largest software company in the world, an empire Bill Gates had built off of the domination of the Windows operating system. Microsoft was on a blazing path of growth, from revenues of $94 million in 1984 to a staggering $4 billion just 10 years later. Microsoft built its empire off the back of some cunning, ruthless business strategies throughout the 80s, crushing competitors and strengthening its dominance of the personal computer software market. But this wasn't the 80s anymore. These were the 90s, and the world was changing. The Berlin Wall had fallen and a new era in globalization had begun. Nothing emphasized the changing landscape of the world more than the internet. It began the 90s with only a few thousand connected users, but by the mid-90s, it had hundreds of millions of connected devices. This was a massive problem for Microsoft because the internet was a fundamentally different technology from what the tech industry had been used to. And worse for Bill Gates, Microsoft had no control over it because anyone with a computer could connect to the internet. That meant the operating system of the computer became less significant. This posed an existential threat to Microsoft, who had built its empire on the foundation of the dominance of its Windows operating system. Now all of a sudden, you didn't need Windows to do stuff with your computer. You could just install Netscape's web browser and connect to the internet, and you would be able to use millions of websites without thinking twice about which operating system was running on your PC. Understandably, Bill Gates saw his empire, underpinned by the Windows operating system, under threat, and so he waged full-out war on Netscape, a battle so bitter that the US government had to step in after Microsoft ruthlessly crushed Netscape. Despite this, they would still go on to lose the browser wars to Google, a company that hadn't been started when the browser wars between Microsoft and Netscape began. This is the story of the browser wars, how Microsoft ruthlessly crushed Netscape and then lost the browser wars to Google. In the early 90s, when the internet started gaining popularity, it was hardly anything like it is today. It featured no images and was mostly text-based. It barely had anything you could click on and was usually laid out very poorly. But in 1993, a project at the University of Illinois was underway that aimed to dramatically change things. Marc Andreessen, along with a group of other students, created Mosaic, a web browser. Andreessen had experiences with other web browsers, but he saw that most of the web browsers of the time were far from user-friendly. So he began building a more accessible and broadly more useful web browser. And the browser came with features such as the use of photos, sounds, and hyperlinks. The browser was launched in 1993 and quickly became one of the most used web browsers in the world, amassing over 1 million downloads by the end of 1993. However, the success of the browser did not translate to any financial success for Marc Andreessen and his team. The browser was built using the resources of the University of Illinois, and thus it was owned by the institution and couldn't be commercialized by the students. So after graduating with a computer science degree from the University of Illinois, Marc Andreessen left the Mosaic browser project. But as luck would have it, post-graduation, Andreessen met Jim Clark, the founder of Silicon Graphics. Silicon Graphics was known for making high-performance computers that were used for various rigorous needs, such as VFX rendering for movies. Jim Clark and Marc Andreessen originally created a 20-page concept pitch for an online gaming network which they pitched to Nintendo for the Nintendo 64 console. But a deal was never reached, so they pivoted when they hired most of the team that worked on the Mosaic browser at the University of Illinois. In April of 1994, Marc Andreessen and Jim Clark founded Mosaic Communications Corporation. However, before any actual products could be released, one significant issue presented itself to the Mosaic team: the ownership of Mosaic. Remember, Mosaic was a research project headed by Andreessen at the University of Illinois, so that meant that the University of Illinois held intellectual property rights to the browser Andreessen had helped to create. The University of Illinois was not pleased with Andreessen and Clark's new venture and chose to sue the pair for infringing on their intellectual property. In 1994, the University of Illinois and Mosaic Communications reached a settlement which saw the university receive a multi-million-dollar payout, and the settlement forced Andreessen and Clark to change the name of their company to Netscape. After the lawsuit, the team got to work building a browser. The internal code name for the browser Andreessen and Clark were creating was Mozilla, which stood for Mosaic Killer, as the company's goal was to displace Mosaic as the world's #1 web browser. Netscape Communications released Netscape Navigator in December of 1994. The browser was an immediate success. They followed the same design principles that had made Mosaic a success, but they didn't just stop there. The browser was specifically designed to work well with various network speeds, including slow dial-up connections, making it accessible to millions of users. It also supported a wide range of web standards and introduced the use of JavaScript, an innovation that would become a cornerstone of interactive web applications. Navigator's intuitive interface and compatibility with multiple platforms, Windows, Mac, and Unix, made it a hit. The instant success of the browser saw rapid growth for the company all throughout 1995. It successfully accomplished what it had set out to do, which was to replace Mosaic as the #1 web browser on the market. In 1995, it had come to command over 75% of the browser market. Netscape's success in the market was in part due to its innovative business model. The company gave away its browser for free to individual users and educational institutions, while businesses were required to pay for licenses. This freemium model allowed Netscape to gain widespread adoption quickly. The strategy worked because businesses that needed support and updates for critical operations were willing to pay for enterprise licenses. In contrast, individual users and educational institutions were allowed to use the software without charge, driving mass adoption. Furthermore, Netscape pioneered the idea of monetizing the internet through web services and technologies. It charged companies for web servers, development tools, and other services necessary to create and maintain websites. Netscape also licensed its browser technology to other companies that wanted to embed web browsing capabilities in their own applications. A mere 16 months after the company was founded, it went public in August of 1995 in a frenzied Wall Street debut that saw the company be valued at $2.9 billion after the first day of trading, despite the fact that the company had only earned $16.6 million in revenue in the previous year and was not yet profitable. Everybody was focused on its immense growth and the millions of users who were using the browser. In 1996, Netscape held a commanding 80% of the market and looked seemingly unstoppable. But taking notice of them was the most powerful and ruthless man in tech, Bill Gates. The early 90s for Microsoft were quite good. They continued on from where they left off in the 80s. They launched various products, among which were the massively popular Windows and Microsoft Office suite. Microsoft had emerged as the biggest software company in the world, raking in billions of dollars from licensing its operating system and from sales of its other products. But this empire was under serious threat. It all rested on the dominance of the Windows operating system. But the landscape was changing. The internet was going mainstream, and the internet was platform agnostic, meaning it didn't matter what operating system ran on your computer. It would be able to access the same internet that every other operating system could. For example, Netscape worked exactly the same on Apple's operating system and Unix as it did on Windows. This meant as the web grew in popularity and got more advanced, the less importance Microsoft's Windows operating system would have. Soon, all essential applications could be accessible through the web, freeing users and developers from being locked into the Windows ecosystem. Microsoft saw the threat of Netscape quite early on. They allegedly approached Netscape to propose a deal in 1995. Though Microsoft disputes how these events went in exact detail, they supposedly wanted to split up the market for browsing between themselves and Netscape. Microsoft offered Netscape the chance to have the browser on all other platforms, and Microsoft building a browser solely for the Windows platform. Essentially, they were proposing a deal to divide up the market between Microsoft and Netscape. Netscape ultimately turned down the offer, which led to Microsoft waging an all-out war on Netscape. In 1995, Microsoft released its latest operating system, Windows 95, to great fanfare. Along with the launch of Windows 95 came Microsoft Plus expansion, which included Microsoft's entrance into the browser wars with Internet Explorer. Ironically, Microsoft licensed Mosaic's technology from a company called Spyglass, which had commercial rights to Mosaic's original code that was written by the Netscape founder Marc Andreessen and his team at the University of Illinois a few years prior. But Internet Explorer version 1 was nowhere near as good as Netscape Navigator. It lacked many of its popular features. Only a little damage was done to Netscape's popularity by the release of Internet Explorer. Because of this, people at Netscape started taking Microsoft's web plan lightly, thinking they had won the browser wars, but how wrong they turned out to be. For the first few months of the war, not much changed. Netscape's Navigator version 3.0 released in August of 1996. It included Netscape's JavaScript, which was greatly influential. To counter the new version of Netscape, Microsoft launched the third version of Internet Explorer. The third version of Internet Explorer included cascading style sheets, which later became one of the three core technologies of the web. But still, Netscape Navigator had 90% usage share of web browsers, while Internet Explorer just had 9% of it by the end of 1996. Netscape was winning the war, but Bill Gates was keen on dominating the web browsing world, and on the 7th of October 1997, the tides turned when Microsoft launched Internet Explorer 4.0. Internet Explorer 4.0 turned the tide in the favor of Microsoft, not because it was a superior browser, but because it was integrated heavily with the Windows operating system. Microsoft negotiated exclusive deals with computer manufacturers to pre-install Internet Explorer on new computers. Microsoft essentially bundled Internet Explorer with every copy of Windows. Windows at the time had over a 95% share of the desktop operating system market. This made it harder for Netscape to compete, as most new computers came pre-installed with Internet Explorer. As the war went on, Microsoft increasingly engaged in some more cutthroat business tactics to try and bully its way to the top spot in the web browser market. To gain an advantage in the browser market, Microsoft designed Windows to make it difficult for other browsers to work properly. Microsoft's most significant tactic was the infamous shell execute bug. This bug caused some users to fail when trying to install Netscape. While Microsoft claimed the bug was unintentional, many believed it was a deliberate attempt to prevent users from installing Netscape. The bug caused significant damage to Netscape's market share and cemented Microsoft's dominance in the browser market. Microsoft also undercut Netscape's pricing by offering Internet Explorer to all Windows users free of charge, including commercial companies. This was while Netscape continued to charge commercial companies for usage. Remember, Netscape was still an unprofitable company. On the other hand, Microsoft had a seemingly infinite pile of money they were willing to use to crush Netscape. Because of Microsoft's increased aggression, Internet Explorer's usage share started increasing greatly while the Netscape Navigator decreased. By the time Internet Explorer 5.0 came out, it already had over 60% share of the browser market. The Netscape Navigator never recovered and essentially lost the first browser war in 2001 when Internet Explorer 6.0 hit its peak share of 96% of the browser market. However, Microsoft's tactics caught the attention of the authorities, who alleged that Microsoft was engaging in anti-competitive behavior and had become a monopoly. In 1998, the US Department of Justice and the Attorneys General of 20 states filed lawsuits against Microsoft, alleging violation of antitrust laws. Microsoft was accused of violating antitrust laws by bundling its software with its operating system, thus giving it an unfair edge over the competition. Netscape was at the center of the case. Microsoft lost the case and was ordered to break up its business into two, with one side being its applications business and the other side being its operating system business. But upon appeal, the verdict was overturned and Microsoft no longer had to split its businesses into separate entities. Instead of being broken up, Microsoft settled and agreed to make it easier for competitors to get their software on Windows. By the time this was all decided in the early 2000s, it was far too late for Netscape. It had all but faded into obscurity. With the demise of Netscape Navigator, Microsoft's Internet Explorer became the sole dominant web browser in the world. The lack of competition, however, would prove to be a double-edged sword. With no competition, Microsoft did not work much on their browser. The new versions only came with minor additions and bug fixes. While Netscape was declining, some former Netscape employees founded the Mozilla Foundation, a non-profit organization that developed the open-source browser Firefox. After delayed and slow development, Mozilla released its browser, the Mozilla Firefox, in 2004, thus starting the second browser wars. Mozilla Firefox had features such as search bar, a phishing filter, tabbed browsing, improved support for web standards, and full support for PNG. Microsoft also released Internet Explorer 7.0 with these features, but they were late. The decline of Internet Explorer was starting. Mozilla Firefox usage share was increasing at a very good speed. By 2009, various versions of Firefox were released with better performance, native integration of audio and video, and many more privacy features. Mozilla opened the way for the web browser community by launching its own browser. It had significant impact and made other companies realize that there is indeed a market for web browsers, and that Microsoft was not as impenetrable as it seemed. It was at this time that Google decided to get involved in the second browser war. Like Mozilla, Google took the open source approach to building a web browser with a project known as Chromium. Based on the open source Chromium project, Google launched the Google Chrome web browser in 2008. In that same year, Microsoft's Internet Explorer web browser had almost 60% of the world's browser market share. Mozilla Firefox was trailing a distant second place with roughly 1/3 of the market. Google's brand new Chrome browser, which the search giant debuted on September 2nd, 2008, had just 0.3% market share, but the market dynamics were changing. Google Chrome adopted a new concept of rapidly releasing new versions with better features. Other web browsers couldn't keep up with this pace. Google saw Chrome as a platform from the very beginning. To Google, the browser wasn't just a means of viewing web pages. It was the nexus of an increasingly diverse range of tools and applications that were changing how we did virtually everything online. Google spied an opportunity to create an entirely new operating system for the open web and capitalize on Microsoft's complacency. Google assembled an A-team of experienced browser developers to build Chrome. This included former Netscape and Mozilla Firefox employees. Their job was to create an entirely new type of browser. Despite the technical challenges of essentially creating brand new web technologies, the Chrome team had one crucial advantage over the competition. They were starting entirely from scratch. While the engineers working on Internet Explorer and Firefox were also trying to adapt their browsers for an increasingly diverse range of tasks and applications, they had to do so using legacy technology. Google, on the other hand, would focus on building custom tools without worrying about any patterns that were used in the past to create browser technology. By July 2009, just 9 months after Chrome's official launch, more than 30 million people were browsing the web with Chrome. In December 2009, Google launched its extensions gallery, an overview of the many third-party plugins that users could install in Chrome to give the browser additional functionality. By December 2010, around 1/3 of Chrome's 120 million users had at least one extension installed, and more than 70 million extensions and themes had been installed across the entirety of Chrome's user base. Through innovations like the Chrome Web Store, Chrome achieved 31% market share, dislodging Microsoft's Internet Explorer from the coveted top spot as the world's most popular browser in 2012. It's also interesting to note that Google used the same tactics that Microsoft had used in the 90s. Google went out to smartphone manufacturers and struck deals with them to allow their Chrome web browser to come pre-installed on their Android phones, similar to what Microsoft had done with Windows by bundling Internet Explorer with the operating system. So Microsoft made the wise decision to discontinue the production of newer versions of Internet Explorer, thus kicking them out of the war. They ended up releasing a new browser called Edge, ironically built on the Chromium open source project, the project that killed Internet Explorer. A fitting end to the second browser war.